My husband needed a kidney. I was a perfect match. 3 weeks before the surgery, I found an email he sent to his college roommate 2 years earlier. Found one. She's compatible. Getting married next month. I read that sentence 4 times. Each time the words rearranged themselves in my brain, trying to form something that made sense. Something that didn't mean what I knew it meant. But there it was, dated March 3, 2019, exactly 5 weeks before our wedding day. I wasn't his wife. I was his spare part. My name is Reese, and for 2 years I believed I was living the greatest love story of my life. I believed that fate had brought us together, that our connection was rare, that he chose me out of everyone in the world because something in his soul recognized something in mine. The truth was simpler and uglier. He chose me because my blood type was B positive, because my tissue markers aligned with his, because my 2 healthy kidneys made me worth more to him than any diamond ring could represent. I was a walking organ farm dressed in white lace, and I had no idea. I met Daniel at a coffee shop in September 2018. I was 29, working as a graphic designer for a marketing firm downtown, and I had stopped believing that the kind of love you see in movies existed in real life. My last relationship had ended 2 years earlier when my ex admitted he had been sleeping with his coworker for 8 months. I had spent those 2 years rebuilding myself, learning to enjoy my own company, convincing myself that being alone was better than being with someone who could lie to your face while kissing you goodnight. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't even open to the possibility. And then Daniel sat down across from me because every other table was taken, and he smiled like he had been waiting his whole life to meet me. He was charming in a way that felt effortless. Not the slick, rehearsed charm of men who practice their lines in the mirror, but the warm, genuine charm of someone who actually listened when you spoke. He asked me about the book I was reading, and when I told him it was about the psychology of decision-making, he didn't just nod politely and change the subject. He asked follow-up questions. He shared his own thoughts. He made me feel like the most interesting person in the room, even though the room was full of people. By the time I finished my latte, I had given him my phone number, something I hadn't done with a stranger in years. Our first date was 3 days later. Dinner at a small Italian restaurant he said his grandmother used to love. He told me about his family that night, his parents who had divorced when he was 12, his younger sister who lived in Portland, his grandmother who had passed away the year before and left him her recipe for homemade pasta sauce. He talked about his job as an architect, the buildings he had designed, the dreams he still had for his career. He asked about my family, my work, my fears, my hopes. He remembered everything I said. 2 weeks later, when he quoted something I had mentioned on that first date, something small and insignificant about how I had always wanted to learn to play the piano, I felt something shift inside my chest. This man paid attention. This man cared about the details. This man was different. What I didn't know was that he had already researched me before that first conversation at the coffee shop. He knew my blood type from a donation drive I had participated in at work, information that had been shared on my company's social media page with my photo, and a caption about giving back to the community. He knew I was healthy because he had found my Instagram posts about running my first half marathon. He knew I was single because he had scrolled through 2 years of my social media history looking for any sign of a boyfriend. The day he sat down across from me wasn't fate. It was the final step in a selection process I never knew I was part of. Daniel proposed on April 7, 2019, exactly 7 months after we met. I remember thinking it was fast, that maybe we should wait, that I had always imagined a longer courtship before taking such a big step. But he was so certain. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and told me he had never been more sure of anything in his life. He said he didn't want to waste another day not being my husband. He said life was short and unpredictable, and when you found the right person, you held on tight and never let go. I said yes because I believed him. I said yes because I loved him. I said yes because I thought I had finally found the person who would choose me, completely and unconditionally, for the rest of our lives. The ring was a 2-carat diamond, $23,000 according to the receipt I found later. An investment I would come to realize. You have to spend money to harvest organs. We got married on May 18, 2019, in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside the city. 87 guests watched us exchange vows. My mother cried. His father gave a toast about finding your soulmate. I wore a dress that cost $4,200 and felt like the luckiest woman alive. In every photo from that day, I am radiating joy, completely unaware that the man holding my hand had calculated my worth in medical compatibility charts and surgical success rates. I look at those photos now and I don't recognize the woman in them. She seems like a character from a movie I watched a long time ago. Someone naive and hopeful and impossibly trusting. I want to reach into those pictures and shake her. I want to scream at her to run. The first 8 months of our marriage were everything I had hoped for. We moved into a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, adopted a rescue dog named Biscuit, talked about having children in a few years once we had traveled and saved more money. Daniel was attentive and affectionate. He brought me flowers for no reason. He left notes in my lunch bag telling me he loved me. He planned surprise date nights and remembered every anniversary, even the small ones like the anniversary of our first kiss. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the cracks to appear, for him to reveal some hidden flaw that would explain why someone this perfect was with someone like me. The cracks never came. Or rather, they were there all along, but he had plastered over them so carefully that I couldn't see them. In January 2020, Daniel told me he had been diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. He sat me down on our couch, held my hands, and explained that his kidneys were failing, that he had known for years but hadn't wanted to burden me with it while we were still dating, that he was now at stage 4 and would eventually need a transplant. I remember the way my heart seized with fear, not for myself but for him. I remember pulling him into my arms and promising that we would get through this together, that I would be by his side through every doctor's appointment and treatment and difficult day. I remember thinking that this was what marriage meant, standing beside your partner when things got hard, loving them through sickness and health. I didn't think about the timing. I didn't wonder why he had waited until we were legally married to share this information. I was too busy being a good wife to ask the questions that might have saved me. The topic of living donation came up 2 months later in March 2020. Daniel's nephrologist explained that a kidney from a living donor would give him the best chance at a normal life, that the waiting list for deceased donors was years long, that family members were often the best match. His sister had already been tested and wasn't compatible. His father was too old and had his own health issues. I volunteered immediately, without hesitation, without anyone even asking. I said I wanted to be tested, that if there was any chance I could help, I would do it in a heartbeat. Daniel looked at me with such love and gratitude that I felt like I was glowing. I thought I was being a hero. I thought I was proving the depth of my commitment. I didn't realize I was playing exactly the role he had cast me in from the very beginning. The testing process took several weeks. Blood tests, tissue typing, cross-matching, psychological evaluations, CT scans of my kidneys. The medical team wanted to make sure I was healthy enough to donate, that my remaining kidney could handle the workload, that I was making this decision freely and without coercion. I passed every test with flying colors. My kidneys were both healthy, both functioning perfectly, both ideally suited for transplantation. When the coordinator called to tell me I was a match, I cried with joy. I thought the universe was giving us a gift. I thought fate had made us compatible not just emotionally but biologically. The surgical team scheduled the operation for April 15, 2020, but it was postponed due to the pandemic. Rescheduled for August. Postponed again when Daniel caught a respiratory infection. Finally set for November 23, 2021, nearly 2 years after my initial testing. 2 years of waiting. 2 years of hoping. 2 years of being a devoted wife while my husband counted down the days until he could take what he needed from me. The email that changed everything was not meant for my eyes. I found it on October 30, 2021, 3 weeks before the scheduled surgery. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, and a notification popped up from someone named Marcus Chun. I recognized the name because Daniel had mentioned him once or twice, his college roommate who had moved to Singapore for work. The preview of the message showed only the first line. Can't believe it's finally happening after all this time. I should have walked away. I should have respected his privacy. But something made me click, some instinct I can't explain. Some voice in the back of my mind whispering that I needed to see what this was about. The email thread went back years. Marcus congratulating Daniel on finding a donor. In March 2019, 2 months before our wedding. Daniel responding with details about me, my blood type, my health, my compatibility scores that he somehow already knew. Marcus joking about how Daniel had always been strategic, and how this was next-level planning. Daniel writing back. Found one. She's compatible. Getting married next month. Found one. Like I was a car he had been shopping for. Like I was an item on a checklist he could finally cross off. Getting married next month. Not because he loved me. Not because he couldn't imagine his life without me. Because marrying me was the most efficient way to secure access to my organs. I read through 3 years of emails in that kitchen, standing so still that my legs went numb. I learned that Daniel had been diagnosed with kidney disease at age 24, 10 years before we met. I learned that he had known for years he would eventually need a transplant. I learned that he had developed a criteria list for potential donors, women who were healthy, the right blood type, and most importantly, single and emotionally available. I learned that I was not the first woman he had pursued with this strategy. There had been 2 others before me, one who broke up with him before he could propose, another who turned out to be incompatible despite initial promise. I was attempt number 3. Third time's the charm, as Marcus wrote in one email, followed by a string of laughing emojis that made me want to vomit. The most painful emails were the ones where Daniel described me. He called me easy in one message, not in a sexual way but in the way you might describe a simple math problem. Easy to read, easy to please, easy to manipulate. He wrote about how my previous relationship trauma made me grateful for basic decency, how my desire for stability made me unlikely to leave over small issues, how my people-pleasing tendencies meant I would definitely volunteer to donate without being asked. He had studied me like a subject in an experiment. He had identified my vulnerabilities and exploited every single one. The man I loved, the man I had pledged my life to, had written about me like I was a farm animal he was evaluating for slaughter. I don't remember how long I stood in that kitchen. I don't remember closing the laptop or walking to the bathroom or locking the door behind me. I only remember sitting on the cold tile floor, my back against the bathtub, trying to breathe while my entire world collapsed around me. Every memory I had of our relationship was now contaminated. Every sweet moment, every thoughtful gesture, every whispered "I love you" in the dark was revealed as manipulation. He had brought me flowers because research showed that small romantic gestures increase partner loyalty. He had remembered my half-marathon anniversary because creating a sense of being truly seen strengthened emotional attachment. He had cried at our wedding because he knew I would interpret tears as genuine emotion when really they were relief that his plan was working. I wasn't his wife. I wasn't his partner. I was a walking kidney with a convenient emotional attachment. Daniel came home that evening with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. He kissed my forehead and asked about my day. And I stood there in our kitchen and lied to him for the first time in our relationship. I told him I was fine. I told him I was just tired. I watched him eat his pad thai and talk about his day at work. And I studied his face like I had never seen it before, looking for some sign of the monster hiding beneath the surface. But he looked the same as always. Handsome, kind, attentive. The man I married. The man who had engineered our entire relationship like a project with a deadline and a deliverable. I went to bed that night lying next to a stranger, unable to sleep, unable to cry, unable to do anything but count the ceiling tiles and wonder how I had been so blind. I spent the next week gathering evidence. I forwarded the emails to my personal account, and then deleted any trace of my access from his laptop. I requested copies of my medical records from the transplant team, and found notes indicating that Daniel had specifically asked whether a spouse would be given priority consideration as a donor. I searched his home office while he was at work and found a folder labeled Medical Planning that contained printouts about living kidney donation, highlighted sections about spousal donors having better outcomes due to emotional investment in the recipient's recovery, handwritten notes about the timeline of kidney disease progression. There was a spreadsheet in that folder dated from 2017, a full year before we met. It listed potential donor sources in order of preference. Family member, unlikely. Sister already tested negative. Altruistic stranger. Waitlist 5+ years. Romantic partner, most reliable. Requires relationship building. Romantic partner. Requires relationship building. Like I was a crop he needed to cultivate before harvest. The hardest part was pretending. Every morning I woke up next to him and forced myself to smile. Every evening I sat across from him at dinner and made conversation like nothing had changed. Every night I let him hold me while I lay rigid with disgust, waiting for his breathing to slow so I could stare at the ceiling and plan my escape. He noticed something was off, of course. He asked if I was nervous about the surgery, if I was having second thoughts, if there was anything he could do to make me feel better. His concern seemed so genuine that I almost doubted what I had found. Almost. But then I would remember the emails, the spreadsheet, the calculated way he had dismantled my defenses and rebuilt me into the perfect donor. I couldn't have second thoughts about a decision I had never actually made freely. I contacted a lawyer on November 8, 2021, 2 weeks before the scheduled surgery. Her name was Patricia Holloway, and she specialized in medical law and patient rights. I sat in her office with a folder full of evidence and told her everything, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with each new detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I will never forget. What he did to you isn't technically illegal, but it's one of the most disturbing things I've heard in 20 years of practice. Not technically illegal, because informed consent for organ donation only requires that you understand the medical risks, not that you know your spouse married you specifically to harvest your body parts. Because there's no law against manipulating someone into falling in love with you for ulterior motives. Because the legal system doesn't recognize emotional fraud as a crime, even when it involves major surgery. Patricia helped me understand my options. I could withdraw consent for the donation at any time, for any reason without explanation. I could file for divorce. I could potentially pursue civil action for fraud, though the case would be difficult to prove and emotionally grueling. What I could not do was undo the 2 years I had spent loving a lie. I made my decision on November 15, 2021, 8 days before the surgery. I was not going to give Daniel my kidney. I was not going to let him take anything else from me. But I was also not going to confront him before I had secured my own safety. I had read enough about manipulators to know that exposure could trigger dangerous behavior. I had spent enough time studying his emails to understand that he saw me as a means to an end, and people who view others as objects don't always react well when their objects start making independent decisions. So I planned my exit carefully, methodically, with the same strategic thinking he had used to trap me. I opened a new bank account and began transferring my personal savings in small amounts that wouldn't raise suspicion. I gathered my important documents, birth certificate, passport, social security card, and stored them at my sister's house. I contacted my landlord from before our marriage, the one who had always said I was the best tenant she'd ever had, and asked if she had any apartments available. She had a 1-bedroom opening December 1st. I signed the lease using my sister's address. I requested time off from work starting November 22nd, citing pre-surgical preparation. I bought boxes and packing tape and hid them in my car trunk. And on November 21st, 2021, 2 days before I was scheduled to give my husband a piece of my body, I called the transplant coordinator and withdrew my consent. The phone call lasted 11 minutes. The coordinator was surprised but professional, asking if I was sure, reminding me that I could take more time to think about it, assuring me that many donors experienced anxiety before surgery. I told her my decision was final. She asked if something had happened to change my mind. I said only that I had received new information that affected my willingness to proceed. She documented my withdrawal and assured me that my medical records would reflect that I was no longer a candidate. When I hung up, I sat in my parked car outside a grocery store and cried for the first time since finding those emails. Not tears of sadness but tears of release. I had taken back control of my own body. Whatever happened next, he couldn't have that. I told Daniel that evening. He had come home from work excited, talking about how he had cleared his calendar for the surgery and recovery period. How grateful he was that we were almost at the finish line. I let him finish talking. Then I said very calmly that I had withdrawn my consent for the donation. I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, concern, and finally, for just a fraction of a second, something cold and calculating before he masked it with hurt. He asked why. He asked what had changed. He reached for my hands with tears forming in his eyes and asked if I didn't love him anymore. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't read 3 years of emails documenting exactly how he manipulated emotions to achieve his goals, I might have believed him. I might have apologized and taken it back and climbed onto that operating table like a good little spare part. Instead, I told him I knew. I didn't explain how or give him details he could use to craft better lies. I simply said, I know why you married me. I know about the spreadsheet. I know about Marcus. I know about the other women before me. The transformation was instantaneous. The tears disappeared like they had never existed. His face went blank, then calculating, then hard. He didn't deny anything. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to explain. He just looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. The expression of a predator whose prey had somehow slipped the trap. You would let me die, he said. Not a question. Not an accusation. Just a flat statement of fact, like he was observing something mildly interesting. I told him that his life was his responsibility, not mine. I told him I was leaving, and that my lawyer would be in contact about the divorce. Then I walked out the front door with nothing but my purse and my car keys, leaving behind 2 years of my life, and a man I had never really known at all. The divorce took 7 months. Daniel fought everything, the asset division, the grounds for separation, even my request for our dog Biscuit, whom he had never particularly liked but suddenly claimed was essential to his emotional well-being. His lawyer argued that I had abandoned a sick husband, that I was cruel and heartless, that my withdrawal from donation had caused him severe emotional distress. My lawyer presented the emails, the spreadsheet, the evidence of premeditated fraud. The judge was not impressed with Daniel's victim narrative. In the end, I received 60% of our shared assets, full ownership of Biscuit, and a divorce decree that felt like a certificate of survival. Daniel got a kidney from a deceased donor 8 months after our divorce was finalized. I know because his sister posted about it on social media, a long message about miracles and second chances and the power of prayer. I felt nothing when I read it. I had expected to feel satisfaction or anger or at least relief, but there was just emptiness. The person I had been married to had never really existed. The villain I had discovered in those emails was a stranger. His life, his health, his future were no longer any concern of mine. I closed the app and went back to making dinner, Biscuit at my feet waiting for dropped vegetables, my small apartment quiet and peaceful and entirely my own. The aftermath of leaving Daniel was harder than I expected, not because I missed him, but because I had to rebuild my entire understanding of the past 3 years. Every memory had to be re-examined. Every moment of happiness had to be recognized as manufactured. I spent months in therapy working through the unique trauma of discovering that the person you loved most had viewed you as a collection of useful body parts, rather than a human being. My therapist helped me understand that what Daniel did was a form of intimate partner abuse. Not physical but psychological. A long-term deception that violated my autonomy and exploited my trust. She also helped me understand that his ability to manipulate me so completely was not evidence of my stupidity or weakness. Skilled manipulators target smart, empathetic people precisely because they are good at reading and responding to emotional cues. My openness and trust, the very qualities that made me a good partner, were the qualities he exploited. I learned to trust myself again, slowly, painfully, one day at a time. I learned to recognize the red flags I had missed or dismissed. The way Daniel had moved our relationship forward so quickly, creating intensity and commitment before I had time to really know him. The way he had always been just a little too perfect, too attentive, too focused on making me feel special. The way he had presented his illness as a revelation rather than information he should have shared while we were dating. Real love, I came to understand, doesn't require someone to be sick or in need. Real love doesn't have a transactional purpose. Real love is given freely without expectation of return, and it certainly doesn't come with a spreadsheet analyzing your value as a donor source. It has been 3 years since I left that house with nothing but my purse. I am 34 now, living in a different city, working for a design firm that values my creativity and treats me like a whole person rather than a resource to be extracted. I have a small apartment with big windows and plants on every surface. I have friends who know my story and love me anyway. I have Biscuit, who is getting gray around the muzzle but still greets me every evening like I am the most important person in the world. I even have a new relationship, tentative and slow, with a man who has been patient with my trust issues and has never once made me feel like I owe him anything. We have been dating for 8 months and haven't said, "I love you," yet. That might seem sad to some people, but to me it feels right. I am taking my time. I am paying attention. I am never again going to mistake intensity for intimacy or speed for certainty. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had never found those emails. I would have walked into that operating room believing I was making a sacrifice for love. I would have given a piece of my body to a man who saw me as nothing more than a compatible donor. I would have spent my recovery taking care of him, believing his gratitude was genuine, never knowing that he had orchestrated the entire relationship around that moment of harvest. The thought makes me physically ill even now, 3 years later. I came so close to letting him take everything. I came so close to never knowing the truth. But I did find those emails. And I did make the choice to save myself. And I am still here whole and healthy, with both my kidneys and a life that is entirely my own. That life isn't perfect. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still flinch when someone moves too fast in a new relationship. I still catch myself analyzing people's motives, looking for the angle, waiting for the manipulation I'm sure is coming. But I am also learning to live with those scars, rather than letting them define me. I am learning that my experience with Daniel doesn't have to poison every future relationship. I am learning that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, just more carefully and more consciously than before. If you are reading this and something feels wrong in your relationship, I want you to know that your instincts are valid. If someone's love feels too perfect, too strategic, too focused on what you can provide for them, pay attention to that feeling. Love should make you feel valued for who you are, not for what you can give. Love should grow naturally, not move at a pace that leaves you breathless and unable to think clearly. Love should be transparent, honest, willing to share difficult truths rather than strategically timing revelations for maximum advantage. If you are with someone who makes you feel like a resource rather than a partner, you have the right to ask questions. You have the right to demand answers. You have the right to leave, even if leaving means someone might suffer consequences from losing access to what you provide. Your body belongs to you. Your organs belong to you. Your love and your trust and your future belong to you. And no one has the right to acquire them through deception. I still have the spreadsheet Daniel made. I printed it before I left, and I keep it in a folder in my desk drawer. Not because I need it as evidence anymore, but because it reminds me of what I survived. It reminds me that I am stronger than I knew. It reminds me that even when someone builds an elaborate trap specifically designed to capture you, you can still find your way out. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, at the cold clinical categories and the calculated assessment of my worth as a donor source. And then I put it back in the drawer and go on living my life, whole and free and belonging only to myself. That is my revenge. Not anger, not bitterness, not wishing him harm. Just living well, living authentically, living as the full human being he never bothered to see. He wanted my kidney. Instead, he got nothing. And I got everything that matters.